On the evening of August 27, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo arrived in Beijing, commencing a 4-day visit to China. But who is Raimondo exactly? She represents the Moderate Center, and at 52 years old, she hails from an Italian heritage. Serving as the 40th U.S. Secretary of Commerce since 2021, she previously held the position of the 75th Governor of Rhode Island from 2015 to 2021, becoming the first woman to hold that office. The Washington Post has described her as a moderate technocrat, often characterizing her as a centrist within the Democratic Party. Notably, Raimondo is currently overseeing several core policies of the Biden administration, including a $53 billion investment in domestic semiconductor manufacturing and the allocation of $50 billion to expand broadband infrastructure across the U.S. Under her leadership, the Department of Commerce also manages a long list of trade blacklists and export controls, aimed at limiting opportunities for U.S. competitors to acquire advanced technologies. This has transformed the Department of Commerce from a seemingly politically insulated entity into a focal point of attention in U.S. politics. It can be said that Raimondo has gained a certain level of fame and influence within the U.S. political scene. At present, tensions are escalating in the Taiwan Strait. Intense technological competition is ongoing, and the relationship between China and the U.S. is at a historic low point. However, at this juncture, the U.S. is deviating from the norm by sending such a high-ranking official for a visit. What exactly is the motive behind this move? From publicly available information, Raimondo's visit itinerary includes Beijing and Shanghai, during which she will hold discussions with Chinese government officials and U.S. business leaders. Last week, in an interview, she mentioned that this visit will build upon the agreement reached between the leaders of the two countries in Bali, Indonesia, last year, aiming to deepen communication on a range of issues. Prior to her visit, she also engaged in conversations with over 100 senior business leaders within the U.S., which strongly suggests that she is not acting alone in this endeavor. The initial impression is that this secretary has thoroughly prepared before her visit and is poised to achieve significant results. The U.S. Department of Commerce simultaneously issued a statement indicating that Raimondo is looking forward to constructive discussions with the Chinese side regarding U.S.-China business relations, challenges faced by American companies, and potential areas of cooperation. From the U.S. perspective, this visit to China is seen as an effort to rescue China. U.S. think tanks analyze that China's economy is currently grappling with issues such as stagnant growth, a real estate crisis, weak exports, high youth unemployment rates, and waning consumer confidence. They believe that China's economic slump will compel it to ease tensions with the U.S. For instance, Paul Hennel, a senior researcher at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center, claims that the Chinese government might use Raimondo's visit as an opportunity to emphasize China's continued friendliness towards foreign businesses, especially those foreign companies that wish to continue investing in China. He notes that China has been striving to dispel the perception that it is unfriendly to business. In essence, they argue that China needs to rely on the U.S. to revive its economy, and their visit is essentially a gesture of benevolence, offering China some benefits. Take the so-called expert analysis mentioned above, that China's economy is in a long-term predicament or even on the verge of collapse. This notion is purely wishful thinking from the U.S. side, continuing the consistent trend of pessimistic views about China over the years. Contrary to their expectations, China's economy has never collapsed and is, in fact, in much better shape than that of the U.S. So, what is the purpose behind Raimondo's visit to China? There might be several intentions. Firstly, it's to address the debt issue. As we all know, the U.S. is currently sitting on a ticking time bomb when it comes to its debt problem. The U.S. credit rating has been consistently downgraded, falling from AAA to AA. But how can the debt issue be solved? The answer lies in finding ways for other countries to buy their bonds. However, the U.S.'s foundation is already laid bare. Who would dare to buy a ticking time bomb? Over the past few months, China has been selling off a significant amount of U.S. debt and, along with other BRICS countries, engaging in trade using their own currencies, accelerating the process of de-dollarization. Raimondo's visit is aimed at persuading China, attempting to have China purchase U.S. bonds to address their urgent situation. Secondly, it's about profits for U.S. companies. In relation to Raimondo's trip to China, an article published in the New York Times titled, "Raimondo's trip to China is about both promoting and restricting trade," points out that her visit carries two contradictory missions: on one hand, promoting trade with China, and on the other hand, limiting trade with China. While the Biden administration might employ this absurd logic, U.S. businesses remain pragmatic. Despite how the U.S. government restricts trade with China, well-known U.S. companies like Boeing, Intel, Qualcomm, and others hope that Raimondo's visit can further open up the Chinese market to bring in more orders. After all, about one-third of their revenue comes from the Chinese market, and U.S. companies don't want to bear the cost of these ignorant and foolish political actions. Thirdly, it's about stabilizing allies. For a long time, in order to contain China's development, the U.S. has often rallied a few wealthy country clubs to hold small meetings, attempting to create a small circle against China through decoupling and de-Chinification. In recent years, U.S. politicians have gone all out in pushing for decoupling from China, forming various small circles globally, and attempting to economically and technologically blockade China. In Asia, the U.S. has partnered with countries like Japan, South Korea, and India, establishing organizations like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the Quad to implement economic and technological blockades against China. In Europe, the U.S. is actively courting EU countries, urging them to decouple from China. However, reality has shown that apart from the U.S. benefiting from this, these allies that followed the U.S. haven't gained much advantage. They have come to realize that decoupling from China is detrimental to their economies and that de-Chinification is detrimental to their development. As a result, during President Macron's visit to China, he emphasized the slogan of European strategic autonomy, and subsequently, European leaders have been flocking to visit China. In the face of the awakening of these allies, the U.S. is getting anxious and fearful. In order to stabilize these allies, the U.S. has to adopt a posture of communication with China to maintain its shaky position as the leader among them. Fourthly, it's to test whether they can suppress China while still maintaining trade relations. While the U.S. keeps pushing for decoupling from China, they currently only dare to experiment in high-tech fields. Economically, China still remains the U.S.'s largest source of imports. Last year, the bilateral trade in goods between the two countries reached a historical high of $690.6 billion. The total U.S. imports from China amounted to $536.8 billion, accounting for about 17% of its total imports. U.S. exports to China were $154 billion, making up 7.5% of the U.S.'s total global exports. Therefore, Raimondo's visit also hopes to find a way to maintain other economic and trade exchanges between China and the U.S. while suppressing China in the high-tech sector, preventing a cliff-like decline in bilateral trade that could shake the U.S. economy. In addition, semiconductor raw materials could also be a significant topic. Starting from August, China officially implemented export controls on critical semiconductor materials such as germanium and gallium. This control measure put many U.S. companies in a difficult situation, prompting numerous American firms to seek ways to apply for export licenses from China. As a technological powerhouse, the U.S. has a substantial demand for germanium and gallium, much of which relies on China. Therefore, it's highly probable that Raimondo's visit will involve discussions on this matter with China. Furthermore, during the G20 summit next month, there's a possibility of a meeting between leaders of China and the U.S. However, recent actions by the U.S., such as restricting investment exports to China and imposing sanctions on Chinese officials while heavily selling arms to Taiwan, have brought bilateral relations to a freezing point, adding uncertainty to the potential meeting between the leaders. As the Secretary of Commerce, Raimondo's visit to some extent signals a desire to seek moderation, preventing a further deterioration of U.S.-China relations in plain sight and potentially salvaging the upcoming meeting from falling apart completely. The statement from the U.S. Department of Commerce asserts that this visit is conducted in a spirit of friendliness. On the surface, the U.S.'s goodwill, indeed, appears substantial. After the official announcement of Raimondo's visit to China, unexpectedly, the U.S. government rescinded sanctions on 27 Chinese entities. This move has been unanimously seen by the media as a gesture of goodwill toward China. China has also expressed a welcoming attitude towards this goodwill from the U.S., stating that such actions are conducive to restoring normal trade between the two countries' businesses and are in line with their mutual interests. However, in reality, the U.S.'s intention is to maintain the means of sanctions on China while seeking China's cooperation to create opportunities for American profit. In early August, President Biden signed an executive order prohibiting U.S. investments in certain sensitive technology sectors in China, with the aim of preventing American capital and expertise from assisting the development of technologies that could support China's military modernization. These various actions reflect that the US is not genuinely interested in sitting down with China for meaningful dialogue, but rather seeks to gain benefits through bullying tactics. Repairing US-China relations is undoubtedly a crucial matter. It affects not only the well-being of the people of both countries, but also the global development and stability. However, the premise of restoring US-China relations must be built on the foundation of mutual cooperation and equal respect.